So let me start with an example of reliability and validity in an assessment. So I chose one called the Dyadic Adjustment Scale, and it's for marriage. Okay. And so within it, it's got 35, 36 questions, something like that. But within it, it's got four subgroups. Okay. And those subgroups, um, are over, what's your communication like? What's your delegation of your roles, um, intimacy, things like that. Okay. And so it measures all of those things. So within those four subgroups, it's got math associated with it saying, like, this subgroup is 92% reliable. This subgroup was 89%. And it had one that was like 70 some percent reliable, right? But it was enough that, you know, because the dyadic adjustment scale hasn't changed in 50 years or however long it's been out there. Okay. So it is reliable. It's there. It is valid. Okay. And it's something that I would use with all my couples too. So like one of the questions was like, I think 35 or 36, it's the last one. It says, how willing are you to stay in this marriage? Pretty much. It says, I will do everything it takes or I'm done, basically is what it's saying in it. And maybe we'll take a look at it today. But but that was like one of the first questions that I would go to whenever they would give me something back. I would go to that last question and, say, well, how invested are they in this? And one would say, I will do everything it takes. And then maybe one would say, I'm done type thing. So then, you're up against, and it'll explain a lot why this person's not engaging, why they're maybe not showing up, all kinds of things, right? So, so it was really, really good to see. And then there were a few other questions in it that I would go to see, how they answered it. But another thing is I wanted them to do it separately because once they were done with it, I didn't want them looking at each other's answers because what if one, the score was really high and they don't think anything's wrong or anything like that, and the other one, the score was really low and there's that discrepancy. And so then that starts something. So you want to ease into those scores. And so I would, have them do that individually too. So here's another thing, and we'll get into some of the multiculturalism here today too, and just to kind of show. So I got pretty good at this dyadic adjustment scale. And so I had a professor at MNU. He goes, I'm going to Africa. I know you've been working with this scale. I want to take that there to churches. There's this big church conference that was going to be there, like 200 different churches that were going to be represented and all that stuff too. So there were, I don't know, 300 couples there that took the test. Okay. So he um, so he went over there, he did the test, came back. I crunched all the numbers and all that stuff too. A lot of things that I found, and this is where the multiculturalism comes into it, that men scored really high on their satisfaction of the marriage, and most of the women scored really low because there was this culture of men leading in such a way as not to include women and things like that too. So, so another thing that I saw that when we were asking questions of the people, that there was a lot of domestic violence. So I even added a question to to this thing, the second round that we did it, and it was um, it was something like, how it does do your fights get physical? Things like that too. And a huge percentage of them did. And so that was another thing that went in. So the correlation of what I was saying is like, okay, the more violence in it, the less. the females, their scores were lower on how well they were in the marriage. Does that make sense? So I mean, so assessments can tell you a lot of information, and I never met one of them. I never met one of the people there at all. So you can get a lot of information, but it's a lot of nameless, faceless things that I was doing. So, but it was pretty eye-opening too. So I even presented on this out as like the Missouri State counseling thing on the results of it, and it was pretty eye-opening. So, and you imagine all the stuff that's going on over there now in Nigeria. Is it Nigeria where this is going on? Yeah, yeah, bad. So, okay, let me bring up the first PowerPoint here. Share my screen. Sorry, there's always all these steps you got to go through. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of minimize you guys just a little bit so I can see my screen here. But if you have anything, just speak up, okay? Any questions or anything like that. And I'm gonna kind of keep this up because I'm not gonna go through all of these slides here. Okay, so what is an assessment, right? So what I like about this, what it says, any systematic method. So there's systems behind it. So systems behind these assessments. So a systematic method of obtaining information from tests and other sources. So like you guys were saying, there's math, there's all of these things behind. So what these researchers do, and hopefully you learned that in the research class, was these researchers go out and do a bunch of research on what's been out there before. What has happened before that I can include? So that dyadic adjustment scale that I was talking about, somebody took, that's why there's four subgroups. It's like, okay, here's the research that I've done, and here's what's important in marriage. So these are the questions I came up with to investigate all of those questions. Okay. So there was a system behind it, right? So it's used to draw inferences about characteristics of people. So how do we observe people out there, right? Just like I said, when for this Dyac adjustment scale in Africa, I never met any of those people, but I got to know them really well by, all the way they answer their questions and how they did that assessment, right? So it's characteristics of people, objects, or programs. So you can assess people, you can assess even programs out there. So that's what your businesses and stuff do too. They go out and do market research on people. That's assessing their business, right? So they'll go out and ask people, what's good about this product? How does it help simplify your life? All of those things. So see, we're always assessing something all the time. Whenever you meet somebody, and you've never met them before or whatever, and they come up, you're assessing them by how they present themselves, do they feel safe? All of those things. We're always assessing something, okay? Psychological assessments, okay, is the application of scientific rigor, right? All of this stuff, that math that you talked about, statistics, all of those things, goes into creating these assessments. So even the way that they um, create questions to ask, that holds a big deal. So words matter, right? So we can put words within the sentences that we're asking, and you word it in different ways, you're going to get different results too. So they even go down to that, okay? Scientific rigor to the gentle art of figuring out what is going on before one attempts to be helpful. So you guys are providing the art within the session room. by learning helping skills, by learning theory, by learning all of these things. You're providing the art in the room and who you are. And then the assessments are providing all of that science that goes into discovering something that's going to help you help them. Okay. Let's see what else it says. What is going on before one attempts to be helpful? Before one blunders into the most vulnerable moments of the intricate lives of others. So here's the other part is knowing that assessment that you're using with these people. Okay. One popular one for individuals wanting to get married is called Prepare and Enrich. So, and we'll take a look at that one. But so there's a lot of scientific rigor that goes into it, but you supply the art of it. And so, they take this assessment, it spits out this information, and you go, wow, here's where I can focus my time with them instead of just going in and not having a plan or anything and just talking to them. You're going to miss 90% of what you could miss. By not having some kind of plan in place or assessing them or something, right? So, okay, other key terms, tests, measurements, variables, psychometrics that kind of go into um, assessments, right? Measurements, variables, what's a variable within this assessment that would make you come up with maybe different answers. And it could be, maybe you're giving them some sort of assessment, but we're not taking into consideration maybe there's some form of mental health going on too, right? So maybe a borderline personality, schizophrenia, who knows? That could sway the results that you get. Okay. So here I put a little table together. Concept. Assessment is a process, and so the description is systematic process of gathering information about a client using multiple methods. So when you go in and you start working with a client, you do an intake with them, right? So what are you doing? You're assessing them, right? Through this intake. So you're doing an interview, and through that, even when you're doing your notes, you're doing using observations. So what did I see body language wise, maybe the way they presented themselves, all of those things. And then formal tests like assessments that, maybe if I feel that they are severely depressed or something, I want to give them, maybe a Beck depression inventory or whatever, just to um, validate what I'm seeing, right? Just make sure that I'm not missing anything. And what is their score? And is it clinical depression? So what do I need to do with that? So this is going to help you create your treatment plan, all of those things, okay? So to make an informed decision about their needs, their strengths, and their challenges, okay? And your challenges with them, okay? Concept is it is holistic. So the goal is to paint a comprehensive portrait of the client covering their biological, physiological, or psychological, I'm sorry, social and spiritual factors in their life, right? And so there's assessments out there that can help you paint that picture, to use the words here. The goal is to paint that comprehensive portrait. Here's another one that I would put in there, and I'm sure that it's kind of probably covered under the biological part, is I want to know what their nutrition's like too. Okay, and assess that part of it. And the reason why I say that is I had somebody that was working with a child, um, hyper, all of this stuff too. So finally, after a while, the parents were going, we just don't know what to do, with this. They get hyper, and it's not all the time, but it's sometimes, and so on. So one question was asked. They go, "What is your child eating?" Okay. And so during that time, she goes, I want you to go back and Give me, kind of the menu of what they've eaten throughout the week. Okay. And they came back and they said, oh, they're eating M&Ms, they're eating, so a lot of sugar. And here's the kicker of it. There was some food, and we were, in looking at the labels, this child was eating a lot of red dye 40, okay, in their stuff. Okay. So the first step is, so there were two kind of steps in it. The first step was eliminate everything that had red dye 40 in it. Okay. The second was limit the amount of sugar intake. So I'm telling you, after I think it was, I don't know how long, through 2, 3 weeks or whatever, the behavior changed so drastically. So then they gave them a whole totally different diet. And so I think they met another 2 or 3 months after that. And so they did what? Assessed that this child was doing a lot better with their nutrition and everything too. And it changed their behavior. So they were able to stop doing the counseling. Okay. But see, when we talk about being holistic, that is an important part that I don't think enough people take into consideration is the diet and everything too, and nutrition and things. So another concept, it is ongoing. So we're always assessing. Okay. Here's the other thing with that dietic adjustment scale. I would give that to couples and it is a snapshot in time. Okay. So you give it to the couples and they take it, and then maybe you do it again, set whatever time that you want to do. Maybe it's 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever, depending on how long you're seeing them. And maybe once a month or whatever, you redo that diet adjustment scale just to see how the scores are changing. And in those subscales, um, that it has, how are those scores changing? So if I'm targeting communication or whatever, is their communication getting better? So you can take, so it's not you taking their word for it or you observing some things. It's something where they're doing the assessment and it's coming out on paper. It's in black and white that yes, they're doing better or not doing better or so on, right? So it's you're not just taking their word for it or your observations. There's some science behind it as well. Any thoughts? I want to make this as interactive as possible for y'all, so I don't have to talk the whole time, especially. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. So we talk about the need for assessments, okay? Yes. Okay. So it provides a treatment map, okay? It gives you focus and a direction on your treatment plan that you're creating, okay? So what is the problem? The problem is without assessments, therapy is just conversation, okay? And without a plan in place, they're going to come in, they're going to have a lot of different things to talk about. And here's what's going to happen. So they'll go from one subject to the next. Either maybe they're avoiding something, so we're not drilling down on what their need is at that moment. And then B, we don't have any um, focus or direction established in this. So we're going to be missing a lot of things, but they're also going to go, I'm not getting anything out of this because there is no focus, right? So that's what doing, a treatment plan with assessments is going to help you with. It's going to help you maintain that focus and direction. Okay. So the solution is assessment allows the counselor to focus the work, define the presenting problem. So focusing on the work, defining the problem that's in front of you, and establish clear, measurable treatment goals. It helps answer the question, where are we going and how will we know when we get there? Right? So we're doing goals. I love SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, uh, R. Re- uh, reality driven. I can't remember what the R is, but something reality driven. Are they realistic? And then T, time sensitive. So we can go in and say, okay, in a month, we want to be here. What are our goals? And this is how we're going to get it. Here are the steps to get there. And that's what your treatment plan should look like. Here's the direction, and here's where we're going. And here are the assessments I'm going to use to measure it. Okay. So it informs accurate case conceptualization and diagnosis. You guys already talked about that. We give you these cases and you can put an actual diagnosis with people in it based upon your assessments, right? So that's, when somebody comes in and maybe they say, well, they have depression or something like that. Well, I may be able to kind of look at it, read the DSM, and it says, okay, if somebody has got major depressive disorder or MDD, this is what it looks like. And I'm like, visually, yeah, that's what they are saying they have, and this is what I'm seeing. But how can I be for sure? Well, that's when I maybe even want to send them to a psychologist that is trained and certified in doing that, maybe a comprehensive depression scale assessment, right? So, so that's where you partner with people who are trained and certified in those types of things. Now, can I give them one that has maybe 10 questions on it and they answer it in the affirmative and I can probably be on my way and get a good snapshot? Yes, but that one that's got 400 questions on it will give you a detailed snapshot of what's going on in their life too. So that's why, like even at Abundant Life, we offer like Prepare and Enrich as an assessment. There's EMDR that's got some assessment and stuff in it. So we offer other things too, that will help you in that arena. Okay. Informs accurate case conceptualization. This assessment helps distinguish between symptoms that might look similar but have different roots. So an example of that, sadness due to major depressive order or complicated grief or adjustment to major life stressors. Which is it? Is it major clinical depression where they have different chemical reactions in their body, right? To, maybe serotonin, dopamine, whatever it is, all of these things that are going on. Or is it just a snapshot of time where maybe they've lost somebody and there's grief in their life? And this is just a snapshot and they're stuck in this grief. I had a woman come in. I saw her, I can't remember how long, but she was stuck in the stages of grief and she thought it was depression, but she was just stuck. And so we worked through that grief. Man, when she got out of it, she's written 10 books now on, it's amazing, but she was just stuck just for that period of time. And it was like 2 years she was stuck, right? But she just needed that help. So it wasn't depression. She was just stuck in grief, right? Complicated grief. So the other, or maybe adjustment to a major life stressor that's going on. Okay. And it helps you to create an accurate differential diagnosis um, when it's required for insurance reimbursement and so on, accessing appropriate external services. So when somebody does need that to be able to get the services that they need and they're properly diagnosed with something, that will help them in the services that they need. Okay. So that's what an assessment can help with. Okay. Okay. Demonstrates professional accountability. This is a big one, right? In an evidence-based practice environment, assessment tools provide objective data. So it's not me, it's not subjective, it's not me thinking this or whatever. I'll give you one example. I had a counselor that they were seeing, I don't know, 10, 15 people and a lot of couples. And they kept coming to me saying, well, the male's a narcissist. The male's a narcissist. Everything out of the 10 people that she was seeing, seven of them were narcissists. I'm like, odds are, math wise, that's probably not it. So, we do a little bit of investigation and all that stuff too. Come to find out that she had come from a narcissistic um, relationship and all that stuff too. So it just tainted the way that she saw the world, right? So everything was this, okay? So there was work to be done on that. So it's not us being subjective, it's objective information that we're gaining from them, okay? So provide objective data to show whether the treatment is working or whether it's not working, okay? So this protects the client by ensuring their time and money are being spent on effective care. So just think if they're coming in and you're just doing talk therapy and you're just talking about things. If they came in one week, talked about one thing, next week, a different thing, right? And then they're going, well, it just seems like we're going in circles or whatever. Um, so it's like, gosh, I feel like my time's being wasted or my money's being wasted. So that's where having a clear direction is so important. Okay. Now, can somebody come in and just, um, you know, unload their week and process through their week and all that stuff? So, yeah, that can happen. That happens, right? But generally, I would say 95% of the time, you got to have a plan moving forward. And it helps you too. You don't want just somebody coming in, you just talk about nothing. It's kind of like a Seinfeld episode, right? Wasn't that, I think they said it's a lot about nothing, or a show about nothing. So you just don't want it to be that. Okay. Here's and it protects the counselor by providing justification for their clinical decisions. That's so, so important. Okay. If you didn't get anything out of this whole slide, that's one of the most important parts, is it protects you, providing justification. So this person that every male was a narcissist in her practice, okay, is there an assessment out there that would help you determine that, right? And you can give that to these individuals. And so it's not me subjectively uh, figuring that out. It's coming from something that has been proven. Highlights strengths and that provides client empowerment. I love this. Assessment is not just about pathology, it's about identifying a client's internal and external resources. I love that. Resilience, social support, coping skills. What do they have inside them that drives them? I love support systems, right? You're their support system. And then they better be having, because you're only with them 50 minutes out of the week. So we want to make sure that they have community of some sort, church, whatever it is, small groups, um, and community outside of you in some way that's going to help them so they don't feel like they're isolating themselves and so on. So, how do we help them find community? And then coping skills are huge, right? So, that's one thing that we want to provide from anybody that came in. I'm saying we may be working on some hard stuff coming up. So, let's get these coping skills embedded in you right now so that you have those skills when times do get tough, when you're in this room or you're away from this room. Okay, so that's why that is so important. So to leverage the strengths in the change process, we're going to be going through the process of change here in a little bit too. So this is core to the counseling model. Any thoughts?
I was just gonna say, in terms of what you were saying about using assessments to justify
Yeah.
your actions, it's crazy how quickly, like, I have already had to do I wasn't subpoenaed, but I had already had to do some clinical documentation for custody. conversations. And if you want to be able to do stuff like that, you have to be able to know you wrote down proper assessment and you made a proper clinical judgment. Because then when it comes down to your rear end being behind under the fire a little bit, it's like not that no one's really mad or anything upset with me
Yeah.
particularly, but there are judgments that could be made that direct how my kids' lives go based on some of the words that I write down. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of weight to that in terms of making sure that like you're clearly communicating your assessment throughout your whole process and your notes too.
That
Make sure
is
it's all in your
so good.
notes.
Maddie, that is so good. It's like, um, because people are going to ask questions and we want to know the whole whole story. And so your notes are important for sure, but the justification of why we're going this too, it's not just something that, I'm pulling out of the air. This is what I'm seeing, but this is what, and really, if just say you went to court on something. So, and okay, so you are a person that gets called up to the witness stand and you're giving your information that you got. So the lawyer on the other side is going to ask these questions going, um, what did you see? Okay, you saw all of these things. Okay, now prove that what you saw is the real thing, right? And so, okay, I can prove it because I did these assessments and it lines up with what I was seeing and so on. So that's kind of what you're talking about, right, Maddie, is being able to justify. It's not just me saying this, it's that because that's probably what you see is probably 35% of it, 25 to 35% of it in the courtroom. The rest of it is assessments um, and other things too. That's good. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Appreciate that.
And Doug, just you'd mentioned about the Enrich and the other one, like they
Prepared.
are different. You go to a different training to get certification for these
Yeah.
assessments.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, I just got certified to certify. So meaning certified
Mm,
to train it and to certify others
that's nice.
yeah, I just got that over the summer. I haven't had a chance to put it into place, but we will do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Those are really good.
So if you're working with a couple, for example, and I don't have the certification, I can refer to another person who has a certification, but I still can like get the results and continue working with this couple.
Yeah, absolutely.
How
Yeah.
did? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So, but we'll help you through that
Okay.
when you get started. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Any other thoughts? You guys are doing good. Appreciate it. Okay. Now we look at the types of assessments that are out there. Okay. There's formal assessments, what you would call standardized norm reference tools, like the example with PHQ-9, Beck Depression Inventory that we talked about. Here's another one that you may not be thinking about, but when you're taking your career class, one of them is career inventories. So many. I mean, if you think of assessments, that's one of my biggest thoughts goes towards is career, right? Because they go, okay, personality. To give you an example, um, I worked for a real estate company and I would help hire new agents in. And so I would do this advertise, do you want to be a real estate agent, blah, blah, blah. And so they would come in and I would give them this thing called a DISC test, DISC. Well, maybe we'll go through that. But it's kind of a personality, chart. It kind of lines out the person's personality. And what I would look at is like going, the perfect person to be this in real estate, whatever it was, buyer, listing agent, whatever it was. Um, they would have this type of personality traits. Okay. So when they would come in, it would show their personality traits. If it didn't line up with those, I would kind of, I would only use that as maybe 25-30% of my decision making in it, this assessment, but it would tell me that their personality may not line up with what the personality type of this job would be. So then you have to go and assess in it in different ways. So that was one box that you check. And so I would even say to him, it's like, well, this isn't lining up, but you do line up with this type of, your personality lines up with this type of stuff in real estate if you're interested in that part of it. Because here's what happens once people get into maybe a job or a career that they don't line up with, there's a lot of tension and stress in there. And either A, they hate your job or they won't last in it or whatever. So they've wasted their time and companies waste maybe money in training them and finding out they weren't the perfect fit. So that's when you go and look for a job, you may get some form of assessment in there and they're assessing, do you fit in this role? So now there are other assessments like I think Strength to Strength is one, Strength Finder. There's other assessments out there, that you can take that will help you map out your career and stuff like that. Even, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit, the Myers-Briggs and stuff. That helps find out what your personality type and does it fit in with that role. Okay, so formal, standardized assessments. Then there's the informal, which are like clinical interviews, um, observation. So like the mental status exam that we're going to go through. Okay, we'll go through that today. Case history, journaling, homework. And a lot of this gets into their own personal thoughts. So self-directed type um, assessments, right? So assessing themselves. So here's a discussion question for us. What were the strengths and limitations of your informant assessment tool, your journaling that you've been doing, okay, through this class, compared to what a formal assessment tool might have provided you? So what we're getting at in that is yours is subjective. If I'm journaling something, I'm journaling a subjective, what are my thoughts? What are my feelings, my emotions, all of that too, compared to what a formal assessment tool might provide to you. Does that make sense? Okay. So it tests worthiness. Okay. So this is where we talked about the research stuff, right? Counselors must be able to critically evaluate assessment tools based on validity. So that's where you go in and do this research going, okay, I'm going to use the dyadic adjustment scale for this couple. I've never used it before. I don't know how to use it and so on. So I can't just say, here, go fill this out. And then they return it to me. And then I look at the numbers and I'm like, I don't know what this means. So we want to go out and we have to do the research on it. How? Okay, so is there validity in it? Is it reliable? So those two things. And then also, how do I score it? How do what do these scores mean? If there's subscales in it, what do those mean? What am I looking for? See how much goes into it. You can't just give them something. Now, there are assessment tools out there that are pretty self-explanatory, and you can just give it to them. And when they spit out the information, you get it back and you can use that. But then there's other ones. It's like, I see some, I'm like, oh man, I don't even want to try to learn this. It's just so that's where these people go out and they go to school and they get certified in it and they spend a lot of time with it. But basically, those types, when you get down to those nuts and bolts of those, you're going to have a person that only uses one or two different ones because then they become experts at those. Does that make sense? So in your counseling tools, you can use some that aren't as formal and they're more higher level, and you can use a lot of those because then you're just finding out, am I heading in the right direction when doing these? Okay. Okay, so we're talking about tools based on validity. That means, does it measure what it claims to measure? And then reliability, is it consistent? This is a core competency, right? So you can have a tool, see if I get this right, one that's valid and reliable, but you can also have some that are reliable but aren't valid. Does that make sense? So validity means, does it measure what it claims to measure? But you can have something that's reliable and you keep getting consistent answers back. Well, it's reliable, but it's reliable with bad information. See what I'm saying? So it's not valid. So we want one that is valid and reliable both. Okay. So if a client, let's see if this pertains to us right now. If a client completes a depression inventory today and then again tomorrow without a major life event occurring, and the scores are vastly different, what does that tell you about the instrument? So it's not reliable, right? It's giving me different answers week to week. So to me, it's based upon, what the answers are coming out of this, maybe the emotions of that day. So here's one thing, it's like somebody will call in and they just went through a crisis and they're calling in to get counseling. Then 7 days later, when their appointment time comes up, they're a no-show. Okay. Well, I want to put a lot of business things in there to say, okay, I want this person to show up. They made an appointment for a reason and they're not showing up. So, okay, let's not have that happen. But let's say it does happen. And you look at it, there's a lot of different variables that go into it, right? So maybe when they did call in, it was 60 degrees outside, damp, rainy, all of this stuff too. But then the day comes a week later and it's 76 degrees out, sunny. They went for a walk, got their vitamin D, and the birds are singing, and life is good. Okay. So they don't show up because, oh, I don't need it now. Well, you did need it at some point. So either A, we're avoiding it, or there's something else going on that could be more, um, whatever, you're going to find out, it could be low, they have depression or something, right? Or whatever it is. So, but anyway, so we have to, um, uh, kind of figure that out, is why they were wanting to come in and why they didn't show up, right? So the power differential. So the counselor holds a position of power and expertise when administering and interpreting assessments. This requires humility and transparency. Tell me about that. So the discussion is, the client is the expert in their life. The counselor is the expert of the assessment process. Okay. But talk about that power differential a little bit. The counselor holds a position of power and expertise when administering and interpreting assessments. This requires humility and transparency. Why did I put that in here?
Well, the for the client coming in, it's a very vulnerable place because they're exposing where they're at, and so there's a huge level of trust that
Yeah.
goes into that.
Yes, absolutely.
I was just gonna add, we don't want to assert dominance over our client either. That
Yeah.
we're like better, because we want to be at the same level. And we're like, there's a mutual care and trust we have, and we don't want to break that by doing that.
And so Josh, keep going with that a little bit. So if we're here and they're here, what else does that provide for them? I guess where I'm going with that is teamwork, isn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah. So we're more
Yeah.
of a team in that aspect than, I'm here and they're there and here's what their expectation is. You're going to give me every answer
Yeah.
for my life. And we're
Mhm.
going, no, that's not the way it is. So we want it here so that we're going, I'm going to walk through this with you. You can
Mhm.
bounce ideas off of me, but we're a team in this, not here.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. Thanks, Josh. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, it's we don't have all the answers. They are the experts.
Um,
Go
just
ahead.
one point that I was
Yeah.
thinking, like, just my personal experience, like, yes, like I have been dealing with therapists and psychologists because of my son his entire life. And it's what usually the good therapists, they will always say, like, yes, I studied and I know a lot about autism, but I don't know about your son. You are the specialist in your son.
That is so.
So you can bring me so much information and we can just meet in the middle because you know your son and he's unique, even though we study about autism, but he is your son and you know much more about him. So I think that would be kind of, I'm just thinking equivalent, like the level of knowledge that the client has about himself. It's as important as what we can bring to the table.
That is so good. Yeah. And so, yeah, you're living with that and you have all these observations, but you have so much power in helping that person who does have the knowledge of, okay, if is this, this is what I've seen before in others. And here's the other part is we don't want to put your son in a box, right? And label him
Mm-hmm.
with all these
Exactly.
others because he's unique, he's an individual, you know all of these nuances with him, and you can help that person who's the expert
Yeah.
in this information, but you're the expert
Yeah.
in your son. I love that.
Yeah.
That's so good. Thanks, Erica. That's good. Any other thoughts? You guys are doing good. Okay. Cultural and social justice discuss how bias, language, race, culture can impact assessment validity. So important. Okay. Is the tool normed on the client's population? Okay. So there's going to be variables in cultures that come in. So remember I told you about the dyadic adjustment scale? We did it here in America, Western civilization. We take it over to Africa in a different type of culture, and we had to adjust it to adjust to their culture. So where was this? That's another important part of your research is where was it created? Who was it created for? Why was it created? Do different cultures give you different results? That's a really big one. Okay. How do you ethically use a standardized test developed in one cultural context to assess a client from vastly different background? That's good. So ethically, we want to learn about their culture and do the research on just kind of what we just said. Who was this written for, and so on. That's good. Informed consent, this is paramount. Clients must understand, one, the purpose of the assessment. So you're giving it to them. Um, here's a thought. And I know that I've had to say this to many people. Uh, when they were doing like the DISC test and it had all these questions, I would say, I want your personal information in here. Not, it's like how you view yourself, not how you feel others view you. Is so important because you can answer it in a way of, well, how does my spouse or how does my best friend or view me? No, we don't want that. We want it to be personal information. Okay. So the purpose of the assessment, tell them that, how the results will be used. So this is what I'm looking for in this assessment. So once they take it, you can even go, okay, here are the results. and this is the information that it's given to me. Okay. Who will see the results? Very important. Is it just me? Or am I going to be giving this to my supervisor? Am I going to be giving this to a doctor? And so on. How is this going to be used? Then the client has the right to refuse taking that assessment. That's independence and autonomy. Okay. So I'm teaching an addictions class at another university. So in an addictions setting, when a court mandates an assessment, how does that change the counselor's responsibility regarding informed consent and confidentiality? Think about that for a second. In an addiction setting, a court mandates an assessment. How does that change the counselor's responsibility regarding informed consent and confidentiality? It's court mandated. Judge is asking for it. There's not going to be a lot of confidentiality, is there? So it's up to us to protect all of that stuff and just make sure that it stays in the hands where it's needed. You can't, like, if it's court mandated, that doesn't mean like it's free for every lawyer and everybody to see. The judge takes responsibility for all that stuff. So we have to keep everything still confidential and all that. So that's very important. Okay. Okay, just kind of recap here. Purpose of assessments and counseling provides pertinent data and data that we need. Here's another thing. The process can be very therapeutic. So we can go into this, but I want to know your thoughts on that. How can the process of doing an assessment with somebody be therapeutic?
One of my favorite ways to do this is with the stages of change, which I know we're gonna end up talking about.
Yeah.
And actually like using that as a tool to help
Yes.
them know where they're at in their process of growth.
Love that.
Or for them to help understand someone in their their life and where they're at. Like maybe there's a frustration about why is my spouse not, you know, at the place that I'm at and whatnot, and then we kind of work back and show them that process. I like will draw it on the whiteboard and show them that process, and I'll be like, "You're here, he's over here, right? You got to give him how much time did it take you to get here, right? Now let's give him some grace and see, what did it take for you to become aware of the problem? What did it take for you to become aware of the solution? What did it take for you to get the work to do the solution? Now it's still taking work to make it second nature, right? So and just kind of helping them even understand that for themselves. Like I do that with 50% of kids and adults, really. I mean, I don't explain it the same way with kids, but I use more kid language, but with adults especially, I'm like, yeah, like if I'm measuring this stuff too, you better be measuring it as well
That's
in your own life because you're responsible for your own growth. So if you know where the language, then we can be on the same page about what we're trying to achieve in counseling.
Well, you just said something there too, the language, that you're using as well. So it's like, so the client can even understand more of the clinical side of it as well. It's just like you go to a doctor and they diagnose you with something, okay, and then you go out and read about it, and here's all this doctor speak and all that stuff too. It's like, what does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
What's this mean to my, what direction we're moving and all that stuff too. If I don't, so that gives you here's another thing. It gives you as the counselor a way to be the expert in the room here though, right? So you're the expert in the room, but it allows you to build that therapeutic alliance and trust, through this whole process of okay, here's all this big word speak and all that stuff too, and we give it to you in a manner that is understandable and digestible. so that and then we're on the same page. So then they trust you. So it's really about building that trust. And if we're building that therapeutic alliance up front, we want them to have trust in us that when we do give them assessment, we're going to do something with it. It's not just to take it and to find out some form of information. They're going to want to know, okay, why did I take this and what does that mean to me through this? So that's where the trust comes up. It's not that you're going to take this assessment and you're going to use it against me some way. You're going to put me in a insane, an asylum or something. You're going to take my freedom away from me if I do this assessment or something. So there's this huge trust that needs to be built before applying these assessments. Maddie, that was good. Thanks. How else can this be therapeutic? Assessments. Jolie, what do you think? Oh,
Sorry, I had to move rooms. Um, I mean, I think it can bring up a lot of topics that maybe wouldn't have been addressed if the question wasn't asked.
yes.
So some assessments might bring up some things that you wouldn't have thought to talk about and might give you opportunity to dive into more.
Jolie, that's perfect. Yeah. So even if you look at the intake, that's an assessment, right? And
Yeah.
so, and individuals are going, I go, man, you gotta do this biopsychosocial thing, so that because it uncovers so much that you never would have thought of. And they're just giving you surface level stuff, but some of these questions, like you're talking about, Julie, will give you um, insight into um, insight into them, right? That's good. Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. Helps you ask better questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts? These are all good. Okay. Process can be very therapeutic. The client has gives them self-awareness, right? So if we discover something, it gives them this is why I'm feeling this way. Oh, this makes perfect sense to me. Gives them self-awareness. Ongoing monitoring of attitudes, knowledge, and skills. And then it helps you with problem solving. So just like what Jolie was talking about, problem orientation, problem identification, being able to ask really good questions and the right questions. Some people ask me, what's the difference between a $200 counselor and a $50 counselor, right? Well, the difference is that $200 an hour, hopefully, that $200 an hour counselor has been able to have the expertise to ask better questions, to get down to what we need to and ask the right questions and in the right way at the right time type of thing. Generation of alternatives, decision making, and verification. Problem solving. That's what assessments help us with. Okay, we probably won't go into a lot of this, but history of assessment, how was it created? Individual intelligence assessment created in the 1800s, sensory processing, physical dimensions. Um, let's see. So these scales that you're seeing here are some that were created in the early 1900s. So they just saw the need to assess things, right? As intelligent assessments, right? So the IQ, right? So we use the IQ to test somebody's intelligence quotient, right? So where are they in their thinking, right? I can't remember what it goes from, what the numbers are, but yeah, so that they can tell the intelligence of that. Now there's intelligence, they say, you will probably only move the needle 10 points or less your entire life of intelligence. Now there's an emotion quotient, EQ, or in, uh, emotional intelligence. Those are kind of synonymous, that you can move that a lot based upon self-awareness and things like that too. So EQ and IQ, there's a lot of difference in those, right? Ability assessment, um, post-World War II, employment screening. And so what's your ability to perform a task, things like that. So you can see 1900, 1940s, there were a bunch of SATs, GREs, those are things that get you into colleges, things like that too. ACTs, all of those, okay? Then there's career assessments. Frank Parsons was probably the most influential person in the career. So I can't remember, there was another name of person. So remember Frank Parsons' name when you take the test, or the NCE and all that stuff too. His name will probably come up some. Strong vocational interest, blank. I don't know if it's blank or bank or something. I don't know. Cooter, preference record, and so on. Then there's personality assessments. One called the Woodworth Personal Data Sheet, MMPI. Then there's the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, and so on. There's a lot of ones that go into the different personality types. Okay, so how do we use these assessments in counseling settings, right? So professional discipline preferences. So if we're wanting to work with people with anxiety, depression, and stuff like that, we better get to know those assessments that help you with those, okay, that measure it. Personal training qualifications, if you want to get certified in things, you have to get to know assessments in that, what you want to get certified in. Maybe it's a type of client issues. Maybe you want to concentrate on, so Erica, maybe when you're doing these things and you want to concentrate on autism, in people with autism or people with children with autism, whatever it is, then, that type of issue. So we want to get to know all the assessments that are out there. And we read a lot of books and do that to immerse ourselves in what that looks like so that we can be the expert in something, right? Or just get to know all of that. So need to show intervention effectiveness. So when I am bringing out an intervention for a client, doing an assessment just says, hey, I've got all of this information gathered. Now, hand went up. So I got all this information gathered. And so what I'm giving to you as an intervention goes hand in hand with that assessment. So it makes it more valid, if you will. Referral-based question. If we're referring out previous testing experiences, the test quality, agency or setting requirements, that might be a good one too, is if the setting requires a person to go through some form of assessment. Maybe it's a drug and alcohol rehabilitation place and they want to know what they're dealing with. They will give required assessments for that. Okay. And maybe even your theoretical orientation. So if you're doing EFT or CBT or something like that, there's assessments in that. So like with EFT, if you're working with couples, there's assessments like that you can do that Gottman may have, or do attachment work or something like that too. Okay. Okay. Um, Key questions for selecting assessments. Okay. This is what we were kind of talking about earlier. Who is making the assessment? Who created the assessment? Right? What is being assessed? That's pretty important, isn't it? Okay. Where is the assessment taking place? Western culture, Eastern, wherever. Okay. When is the assessment occurring? Why is the assessment being undertaken? Why are we doing this in the first place? What information are we looking for? So here's all of these are the who, what, why, hows, okay? How is the assessment conducted? Let me throw that out there. Why is that important? How is the assessment conducted?
Well, that could influence how the client scores on their test.
Hmm.
If is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's like where it's done,
Hmm.
who's giving it. Maybe you're a counselor and you go, okay, I want you to go to this building and there's an administrative staff person. They're going to give you this piece of paper. I want you to take that test. Well, how is that maybe different from, okay, maybe they're taking it right in front of you in that safe environment that you've provided for them, and maybe you're testing for anxiety. So their anxiety spikes because they're going to some unknown place and they're taking it in some, see what I'm saying? So where and how it's conducted can be influential. Yeah.
Doug, that's interesting. Like my real experience, like they do lots of tests for my son. Of course, they are adapted for disabilities, but I know what he knows. I don't know what he knows. He knows much more probably than I know, but I know some, like because I work with him at home, and his teacher also knows where he's at academically. And but then it comes like the psychologist from the district and wants to do the test with him, and his score was never like what we knew that would be. So I in an IP meeting, I requested like I want him to have his teacher or one of the parents that he is familiar with, that he loves them, thank God, and then he would do it differently because there's someone that he trusts and he will feel safe and less anxious. And I want the test being taken in his school building, and that changed totally the score. Just having his teacher or someone that he trusts and is familiar with. It's exactly the same test, but
Wow.
he was less anxious.
Yes. See, so Erica, this would be like, have you taken the research class yet? Oh, okay.
I did.
Okay, so I was going to say this, I mean, this could be a research thing, you know? You could be researching, am I getting the same information that I could in this area as I would be if they're taking it in this or under these circumstances or whatever. So what are the most beneficial um, areas, that for them to take these that they'll be getting if we're getting the best information back. That's so good.
I was just gonna add, I think we kind of like prioritize the results more than the process, in the test taking process. And I also did the research class, and my topic was social anxiety and test taking, and how that impacts self-esteem and how that impacted their results in the classroom. And this was the demographic was like middle school students. So it was really interesting to see how and where they take the test impacted how they viewed themselves, the self-esteem, and how anxious they were.
That is
So
good.
that was my research for that.
Yeah. So then you can go back to your professors and say, Man, I don't want to take this test here because I know my grade is going to be lower if I take it here as opposed to somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I guess. Maybe.
Or you can tell them, well, the reason why it was this grade is because you gave it to me in this spot. If I would have taken it here, it would have been 10 points.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's good. Oh, I love that. I'd like to read that sometime. That'd be good. Any other thoughts? Okay. So all important questions, okay? Distinctions in a selected assessment. Okay, so S data versus O data, we're going to go a little bit into that. Okay, subjective or self data, whoa, versus objective data. Okay, individual versus environmental assessment, standardized versus naturalistic assessment, um, tracking current versus previous information. So current information versus what's happened in the past, objective versus projective assessment, qualitative versus quantitative. You guys know that one from you probably did a lot of studying on qualitative versus quantitative, right? In your uh, research class. Yeah, qualitative and quantitative. I did my dissertation and it was qualitative. Ooh, that's a tough one. Qualitative is tough. So quantitative is so much easier because the numbers, you just got numbers. And it's all you have to deal with. And they tell a story. Qualitative is so subjective, and then you have to do so much more research and all that stuff too. So anyway. Okay, so we'll get into this a little bit. S data is self-report data, okay? It's information the individual provides about themselves through questionnaires, interviews, journals, or self-rating scales, okay? It focuses on your internal experiences, such as feelings, attitudes, emotions, self-perceptions, and so on, okay? Example would be, I often feel anxious around others. Completing the Beck Depression Inventory or Personality Assessment Inventory um, is they're checking your feelings, okay? Journaling about personal thoughts or emotions in therapy, that's subjective. So the strengths of this are direct access to inner thoughts and feelings. So we're getting from them the emotions and what their thoughts and feelings are. Easy to administer and interpret. Okay. Because you can ask questions of them. Why? Things like that, right? It encourages client self-reflection and ownership in therapy. So them taking responsibility and so on. So the limitations of this are, as you can imagine, can be biased by social desirability, wanting to look good. And there's a thing called halo effect. There's another thing called, oh, I can't remember what it was, but it is answering a question as I think that you would want me to answer it. Okay. And I had to put that in my paper that I wrote. And there's a huge part of it because there was this power differential. And even the guys who were measuring me on, when I was defending it, that was a huge thing for them is the power differential they had is me being director of the counseling center and I'm using counselors in there. So I had to give them what our counseling center looks like. It's not me being over everybody. It's us being collaborative and all that too, setting that culture of collaboration and teamwork and all that. So it even that playing field, like what Josh was talking about earlier, it evens that. Okay, limited by self-awareness or denial. That's a big one, right? What are they avoiding? If they're avoiding something, that could impact their emotions and so on. May be inaccurate if the person lacks insight or minimizes those symptoms. Okay, that's some limitations. Next one is called OData. the observer report data. I said objective. I'm sorry. It's observer report data. So self-reporting, now observer reporting. You're the observer looking at them, okay? O stands for observer, information collected by someone else observing the individual. So when I did my dissertation, right, it was, I asked questions of them. I asked 8 questions. And so I would observe them and how did they answer it? So I did more than just what they were returning to me in information. It was even body language and so on. How were they answering it? Uh, what was their body language? How their tone of voice? All of this stuff. How was that affecting it? So information collected by the observer, such as a counselor, teacher, spouse, peer, and so on. That's why, if you have somebody come in and they are experiencing something, maybe it's an addiction or something like that too, and maybe they're functioning alcoholics or whatever, okay? So maybe you do bring in family members and ask them questions. How are you experiencing this person? Because what I'm getting from them is they are highly functioning people. How are you experiencing them? Well, I experience them as they get up late, they miss a lot of appointments, whatever. But when they are getting up around, they're highly driven people, and so on. See what I'm saying? So you can get information by interviewing others as well. Focuses on externally observable behaviors rather than their internal feelings. So example would be a counselor notes a client's fidgeting, eye contact, or their affect. A teacher rates a child's classroom behavior without even knowing everything that's going on within them. They're rating their behavior. A spouse reports changes in mood or substance use patterns. Okay, those are all examples of outside observers. So the strength in this is often more objective than self-reporting. So are they giving me in self-reporting, are they giving me all the pertinent information and so on? Or what are others observing? Useful when clients are defensive, unaware, or unable to self-report accurately. And allows cross-validation of subjective type data or self-report data. So it's validating. So the limitations of this is observer bias or limited perspective. So you're not getting the whole story, you're only getting what you're observing. May misinterpret internal motives behind behavior and relies on the observer's relationship and accuracy. Accuracy, so if there's bias in this, so maybe somebody's giving you information, but it's biased to the point of maybe they like the person or don't like the person. So it's going to be negative or positive information, or they could be protecting or so on. So there's the accuracy of that. So you have to take all of this into consideration. So here's kind of just a table with the difference, right? Category source is the client. OData observer is another person. Inner thoughts, emotions, beliefs versus observable actions. Advantages, insight into subjective experience or more objective behavioral information. Bias is a limitation. Lack of self-awareness is a limitation. Observer bias, limited access to inner states, and so on. Best use is when self-insight is high and when you have reflective clients. So that's the best use. Best use of observer report is when behavior is key or client insight is low. Does that make sense? So if you're getting some really good self-awareness and highly reflective person that has that really good self-awareness, self-reporting is good. But if they don't have that and they lack that, then observations by others is better. So how are we integrating self data and observer data and counseling? So in counseling, both types of data together give a fuller picture. So we want to do those interviews of the person in front of you and those surrounding you in your community. What are you observing? Are we getting the full picture? So an example in addiction counseling would be, I think I'm managing my cravings well. The person may say that. Observing, maybe observers may say, counselor notes that the client has missed 2 sessions and appears irritable. So what they're saying and what you're observing is not jiving, right? So then you can ask what? Better questions of them. So together, these reveal both self-perception and behavioral evidence, helping guide accurate assessment and intervention, treatment planning, and so on. So practical tips for counselors: compare your self data and observer data for discrepancies. Use differences as discussion points. So you report low anxiety, but I've noticed you seem tense when we discuss relationships. Your body language is telling me, yeah, I see you tense up when we start talking about something that has created anxiety in the past. So I'm not seeing a whole big change of anxiety, but you're saying that your anxiety is a lot lower. Let's talk about that. Incorporate collateral reports from family or supervisors when assessing addiction severity or treatment progress. Remember this, neither data type is superior. They complement each other. One's not better than the other. It depends on how you're using it and when you receive it and so on. All right, let's take a break. How about that? Let's take a break for, what time is it? It's 10:30, so come back at 10:40. 10 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Hey, Doug, just one question.
Huh?
The slides are on Canvas,
Um,
or you?
they are, but I've added some to these, so I'll have to put those out there.
Okay,
Yeah, but they're
okay,
not
no
there.
problem. Just to know.
And it should say PowerPoints. There's a file under
Okay,
PowerPoints, and they should be there. Yeah.
perfect.
Good,
Thank
good
you.
question. Yeah. Yeah. So I've kind of done some work on these, and so I've added quite a bit. So I'll have to put these out there.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you
Sounds
so
good.
much.
Uh-huh. Okay. So chapter 2 of the book. So we won't go through all the chapters, but we'll just hit the big ones here because you're reading it and so on. So um, okay, so the assessment process. Okay. So types of assessment methods. Okay, so the methodology around assessing something, right? So there's group versus individual assessments, standardized versus non-standardized assessments, qualitative assessments versus quantitative, like we talked about, speed versus power test. Speed is homogeneous, easy items, so something that you can go quickly through. Power identifies or items of varying difficulty. Okay, so we'll go through some of these. Standard versus non-standardized assessments in counseling. Okay, standard assessments definition. A standardized assessment is an instrument that is administered and scored in a consistent, predetermined manner. So, like schools, they give a lot of standardized. So, think about when you went through school, standardized tests that you took. So they're all measuring something. They're all the same. So they're measuring something. What's the output of it? So it's based upon what the questions are. It is developed through scientific research to ensure what? Validity, reliability, and norm reference comparison. So examples would be a Beck depression inventory. Those are big ones, right? So Beck has a depression one. MMPI-3, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. I think there's even an MMPI-4 now, I believe. So the WAIS-4 Audit Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test. The first one was an adult intelligence test. So the characteristics of these standardized assessments are they're uniform. So they give you, okay, here are the steps of giving it. Here's how we're going to give the test. Here's what's in the test. Here's how we're going to collect the data. So it gives you all of these things, right? And so you got to follow these rules, if you will. The standard scoring system. So they have a scoring system that they evaluate on. Normative data for comparing individual scores to a population, so a certain population. So they'll give these tests for schools, and they'll base it upon that population of that region. So here's a test that you'll be taking. So the NCE for counseling. So that's a standardized test that they give to people, and so they base your results off of how other people have done in that as well. So a national average, they take a national average. How do you compare it against that? So that's where they get your pass or fail. Okay. It's highly reliable and highly valid. Those tests are highly reliable and highly valid. So the advantages of those objective and comparable results. So you can see and you can compare those results. Can identify patterns or severity of symptoms. Useful for diagnosis and treatment planning. So useful when diagnosing something and then creating a treatment plan around that. So they've got these books out there. There's a bunch of them. It said creating a treatment plan for an adolescent with whatever, or adolescents. And then you can go through it, and these books are this thick, and they'll say, okay, if they have depression, here's a treatment plan. If they have anxiety, here's a treatment plan. If they have OCD, here's a treatment plan. For adolescents, what about adults? Things like that too. So what they've seen through these assessment and tests, they're able to put these treatment plans together that have been proven to work with a large part of the population that have that issue. Okay. It can feel impersonal or rigid because you're not being, you're taking the test and it may be written or over a computer or something, so it's impersonal. Requires proper training, interpretation. So we've gone through that a lot. It's like, are they certified? The interpretation, how do I interpret the results, and so on. So non-standardized assessments, they're more flexible and can be adapted by the counselor to meet individual client needs. It focuses on qualitative insight. So this is like the MCE, I can't remember what this stands for. So, but the exam that you give to individuals when they come in and you do an intake. So mental status exam, I think it was called, yeah. It focuses on qualitative insights, allowing for holistic understanding of the person, them as a total. Examples would be clinical interviews, open-ended questionnaires, journals or reflection exercises, like what you guys are doing in this class, behavioral observations, counselor-created rating scales, so on. I love doing rating scales. So I'll ask them, a question, and if they give me an answer of 7, okay, what would make it an 8? What would make it a 9? What would make it a 10, right? So based upon what your answer is now, how do we make it better? So they're the expert of themselves. What can we do together that will help you create the best life possible? Characteristics: informal and adaptable, lacks normative comparison data, so you're not really able to compare it. It's all subjective. You can't compare it against a population. Often used for exploration and rapport building. So you're going to use a lot of non-standardized assessments in your practice. A lot of advantages: culturally sensitive and personalized. So that's something that you can weigh it against a certain culture of people. Encourages open communication, provides context and depth beyond just mere numbers, right? Okay. Limitations are, of course, what we talked about: subjective and prone to counselor bias. So the one person that was saying that everybody that she's seeing, how come you keep giving me all these narcissists? You know? So that was their bias it was subjective bias, okay? Harder to compare across individuals over time. And it may lack scientific reliability. Okay. So here's a little chart on what that looks like that you can, when I put that out there, you can get this little chart, okay? On what standardized versus non-standardized assessments and counseling look like. So types of assessment methods, rating scales, let's see, projective assessments. So remember the Rorschach, you guys know what that is? So it is like the ink blot test, right? So that's projective assessments. They're projecting something on. So to me, you have to really study that type of an assessment, right, to understand what that all means. I actually had somebody write a paper on that in this class, so it was pretty cool. Behavioral observations: behaviors can be observed and counted. Okay. Other types of methods like interviews. You can have structured, unstructured, semi-structured interviews. So a structured one would be set of questions and they don't vary. Unstructured would be, I'm going to go on, here's my first question, and then we go from there. I ask questions based upon the direction that it is going, or you can have a mix of both of those. Biographical measures, biodata, physiological measures, example, heart rate, breathing rate, muscle contractions, blood pressure. So I want to give you this. There's John Gottman. You guys know the Gottman stuff? Okay. So John Gottman wrote this book that he's written several, but one was called 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. In the first, I can't remember, I think it's up to the 4th chapter or whatever, he talks about how he came to creating these assessments, okay, that he's giving out. So what he did is there's this thing called the Love Lab in Seattle, and he takes couples, and he did over 3,000, 4,000 couples in this Love Lab, and it's in Seattle. So they go in, they have cameras in there, they've got two-way mirrors, all of this stuff. So they're being observed the whole weekend or the week or however long they're there. And so when they have a fight or whatever, they'd go in and they'd take urine samples, blood samples, and all that to see how their chemicals in their body were different before and after fights. Okay. So what they found was more cortisol, adrenaline, other chemicals were going into their body. And they said, okay, what's that mean? So what they would also have these heart monitors on them. So when they would get into fights or whatever, what did their rates look like? So all this physiological stuff was being measured, muscle contractions, all of these things, so they could see better evaluate, okay, when this happens, their heartbeat goes up, blood pressure goes up, all of these things. So, okay, if this happens, then what if we went in there and we did give them great coping skills and things like that too, that would help them in times of when they, were getting dysregulated. So then they would do that and they'd give them these coping skills and better communication and all that stuff too. If we give them better communication, what's that do? And they go measure it. If we give them coping skills, what's that do? And then they go and measure that and see where physiologically things were done. And then they could give them self-reporting. So during this time, and they give them questions. So what did you see? What did you notice? All of these things. So see where all of these assessments work together to help this couple, but thousands or millions of other couples by these assessments and observations. Okay, assessments of client stages of change. So we'll go into that in a little bit. 4 major assessment phases. You have the selection of the test that you're going to do. You have the administration of it. Then you have to interpret it and then communicate the findings. Maybe it's through a treatment plan or whatever it is, but you're communicating these findings, and this is what we're going to do moving forward and create goals and so on. So if we go into test selection, here's some sources of information. Mental Measurements Yearbook. So this has all the assessments that may go into mental health. Okay. Tests in print. There's books out there, of assessments. Tests and test critiques, counseling related journals. What do you think would be the best one out of these 4? These sources of information, what do you think are the best ones?
I would guess the Mental Measurements Yearbook, but I don't know that I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. Any other thoughts?
I was gonna say the same thing just because that one's the most familiar to me. Like that, I feel like I've learned that in other classes.
Yeah, yeah. So the good thing about it is, so the Mental Measurements Yearbook, if they're distributing it on a yearly basis, it's current. So you're getting current information, right? And you can go back and look at, past yearbooks and stuff like that too, of the information put in. Some other good ones, like what they're having here, are journals. So journals, man, they could be right on. So what if something just came out and you're getting the journal a month later and it's something brand new? So that would be something to be even more current than the yearbook. But you want to have the most current information possible. So yeah, good job. Okay, and then locating specific assessments that pertain to maybe the issue that you're dealing with, okay? So how to administer it. So considerations based upon the test format, expectancy effect or the Rosenthal effect. What do we expect to happen? Based on my observations, what do I expect? So to give you an example, when I told you I gave that DISC test to people who were coming in for employment, I would tell you probably 95% of the time I could guess what their DISC was going to be just by talking to them. Okay? Because I just got that good at administering it and talking through it, via the interviews. One person came in and I said, oh, okay, they're this. Then I got their results back. And it was totally different than what I observed and thought and all that stuff too. So what do? I go in and I ask questions. I go, so what I observed, all this stuff too, I didn't say this, but this is totally different. I ask these questions. So one question I ask is, what's going on in your life right now? And I asked it in a different way, of course, but what's going on in your life? She goes, well, I just had a baby. My husband just left. Um, I lost my job. So all of these things that happened to her were causing something going on to create a difference in what her personality was. So she was like desperate for a job. She was, because she had a child to protect and to provide for and all of these things. So she was desperate for a job. So she wasn't answering these questions in a way of she was answering them out of necessity, right? So like her personality changed because I'm becoming this protective mother and all that stuff too. So her personality changed. So it wasn't her norm, if that makes sense. So we really have to watch that too. What's going on in their lives that may make the information that's being provided different. Stereotype threat, and I throw in multiculturalism, all of those things. So to being able to administer it under a multicultural aspect too. Maximizing an optimal administration for clients, providing structure. We talked about that. So providing a place, structure, safe place, all of these things, reviewing the conditions for better performances. If we give the test here, what are the results? If we get over here, what are the results? And so on. Testing conditions, accommodations. What if we're giving them a test for anxiety or something and we're giving it to them and next door there's this huge construction going on and there's jackhammers and there's all kinds of stuff. Are we going to get really good results based upon the environment, right? So we may be getting higher results of anxiety because that's the environment that they're in. Well, so that was another thing is when I did my dissertation is when I put in there is like this was the environment that we did it in. So I took into consideration all of them were over Zoom so I could record them, but this was the environment that I did it in. So I made sure that they were in a place where they were not going to be uh, interrupted and so on, where they could hear, where they could speak freely, and so on. So then interpreting the results and communicating the findings to them. So considerations related to test interpretations, hand versus computer scoring. So are we doing it by hand? So these dyadic adjustment scales that I did, they would do their test by hand and I would score them by hand. Okay. So maybe there's room for error. So maybe I make an error on computing things if I'm doing it by hand. So then maybe a computer scoring is better. Computer-based testing, interpretations, okay, international tests. I don't know what that means. So we're going to skip that part. Okay, monitoring client progress and evaluating counseling outcomes. Progress monitoring, feedback enhanced therapy. So you want to get feedback from them. Outcome assessment, comparing a score to a desired score in another group. That's like when you take your test for the NCE. Here's your score. Here's the desired score. Maybe of the other group, comparing a score to a particular criterion. Judging whether a baseline score has changed. 4 useful tools would be client satisfaction forms, client self-reporting scales. We do a lot of that in our counseling center too, where you can give them and they can report back how they're doing. And we do it in a way that we can put a number to it and then we plot it. So week after week, we plot what their number is, and then we can see, whoa, what's going on in their life? Is the trajectory going upwards, which is the way we want it to? Or is it going down, meaning there's something going on in their life that maybe we should investigate? So you can do things like that, client self-monitoring. So that's where you ask the question, how was your week? How are you doing? Rating scales on a scale of 1 to 10. How does this make you feel or whatever? And you can, in EMDR, that happens a lot. So in EMDR, there's a lot of rating because you want to get them to a particular unit of stress, less stress, if you will. Okay, reports. The audience, is it a court report? Is it a referral from somebody? Are you just doing the assessment and that's it, and you're handing them back over to the counselor? Mental health practitioner would be one person that would be that way. Is the state requiring something court related? Whatever it is, okay? What type of report are we given and getting, okay? Okay, and we won't go through this, but so when you're writing up a report, this is the stuff that's in that would go in it, okay? Reason for referral, background information. You want to collect all of this information so you know where it came from, why we're doing it, who we're giving it to, and it's a lot of this is for your own protection when we're doing it to maintain confidentiality and all of those things too. So it's kind of guardrails to keep us in sync, I guess. Okay, any questions? Thoughts? A lot of information, isn't it? Okay, let me get out of this one. All right. Bring the next one up. Okay. This is a short one here. Okay, standards and guidelines for evaluating tests and test usage. So this is where it's important to have these guidelines, that you're going to be following, okay? So several standards and guidelines are available concerning the development and use of psychological assessment procedures. So I'll bring up, doing my dissertation a lot because it was a whole process that I had to go through. There's this thing called the IRB, which is the International Review Board, which you had to put down, okay, here's what I'm testing. Here's how I'm going to test it. Here's the results that I expect or whatever. You really didn't have to give that as much. But really what they're doing is they're going, okay, are you going to be protecting the people? How is confidentiality going to be taken care of? There's this thing of do no harm. So are any of the questions going to be harmful? How are you administering it? All of these things, you had all of these guidelines that you got to do. So when they're creating assessments, there's these guidelines that they have to go by too to make sure that they're creating something that's going to be valid and reliable, for one, but also is going to do no harm and so on. So the ACA Code of Ethics, that was, they've had a bunch, but the last revision was in 2014. There's an NBCC, National Board of Counselors. Is it Christian counselors? Yeah. Okay. Code of Ethics. Standards for educational and psychological testing. So they've got these standards that they want you to go by when creating a new assessment. Okay. So let's watch this here. This is about the code of ethics and how to scoring and interpretation and so on. Sure the sound is. Okay. Now let me know if you can't hear it.
Build a website you love with Wix.
All right.
For your words, create.
Can you see it and hear it? Okay.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to my video on ethics in assessment. I'll be looking at Section E of the 2014 American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. Section E covers evaluation, assessment, and interpretation. Just a reminder that this video is not a substitute for reading the Code of Ethics, and if you have any questions about a specific section of the Code of Ethics, I'd recommend speaking to your supervisor or another individual otherwise qualified to assist you. So I'll be starting at Section E1, which is titled General, and it has two subsections, assessment and client welfare. So in subsection E1A, assessment, we see that the primary purpose of mental health, career, psychological, and educational assessment is to gather information regarding the client. This information includes data that will help in client decision-making, occasionally forensic proceedings, and of course, treatment planning.
Things happen
Oh,
here.
you gotta be kidding.
No one really talks about it.
What exactly are we looking for? Something that...
Assessment methodology may include both quantitative and qualitative approaches. In section E1B, titled Client Welfare, we see that counselors cannot misuse assessment results and interpretations and need to take reasonable steps to prevent other individuals from misusing the information. Also, the client has the right to know the results, the interpretations that were made, and the basis for conclusions and recommendations that the counselor develops. So moving over to section E2, this section is titled Competence to Use and Interpret Assessment Instruments. So in subsection E2A, the code discusses limits of competence. As a counselor, you can only use instruments when you're competent to do so. And this competence can come through training or experience or a combination of both. This obligation is still in place when using technology-assisted test interpretations. So specific training is required when using technology-based applications. Also, if you're supervising a counselor, a supervisee that is deploying assessments, making evaluations, you are responsible to take reasonable measures to make sure that your supervisee is properly using the assessments. In subsection E2B, titled Appropriate Use, we see that counselors are responsible for the appropriate scoring, application, and interpretation of instruments, whether the counselor scores and interprets the instruments themselves or uses technology to do so. In the last section of section E2, which is E2C, we are reminded that if counselors are responsible for making decisions involving policy or regarding individuals, and these decisions are based on assessment results, the counselors are responsible to have a thorough understanding of the psychometric properties of those assessments or instruments. Moving to section E3, informed consent in assessment. We can see that subsection E3A involves the explanation to clients. The purpose or specific use of results from an assessment must be explained.
Build a website you love with Wix. For your words,
Explained to clients prior to the assessment. And the explanation must be given in terms and language that the client or another individual who is authorized to hear the information on behalf of the client can understand. Section E3B reminds us that counselors must consider the client's welfare, any explicit understandings and prior agreements in determining who receives the results of an assessment. Counselors must always include accurate and appropriate interpretations with the release of any group or individual assessment results. Section E4, release of data to qualified personnel, is relatively straightforward. Counselors may only release data to individuals who are authorized to see such data, such as a client's legal representative. The individual or individuals who are receiving the data must be recognized by the counselors as qualified to interpret the data. Let's now take a look at section E5, diagnosis of mental disorders. You can see in E5A, proper diagnosis. Counselors must use caution to provide a proper diagnosis of mental disorders to clients and carefully select and appropriately use assessment techniques used to determine client care. For example, the type of treatment or follow-up recommendations. Section E5B, cultural sensitivity, informs us that clients must consider the culture.
Things happen here, but no one really talks about it.
Looking at section E5, diagnosis of mental disorders, you can see subsection E5A, proper diagnosis. Counselors must use caution and provide proper diagnosis of mental disorders to clients when appropriate, and must carefully select and appropriately use assessment techniques used to determine the care of clients, such as the type of treatment or the follow-up recommendations. Section E5B informs us that counselors must recognize that culture affects the manner in which clients' problems are defined and experienced. Counselors must consider cultural experiences and socioeconomic status when diagnosing mental health disorders. Section E5C reminds counselors that historical and social prejudices in the diagnosis of pathology must be a focus of counselor awareness, and counselors must try to address any biases that they detect in themselves or in others. And the last subsection in E5 is E5D, and this tells us that a counselor cannot make a diagnosis if that diagnosis would cause harm to a client or others. Counselors must carefully weigh both potential positive and negative implications of making a diagnosis.
So that's one thing I want to kind of stop there. So not making a diagnosis if it would cause harm would also be somebody who's not completely trained in that assessment. Giving that assessment to them and turning over the results without knowing the whole interpretation of it. So that's why that's so important to understand the assessment and researching it, understanding it fully. Like, what are our expectations of what am I seeing when I get this back? So sorry for all these commercials in there. I've got premium and it's supposed to not have that. So maybe when it's embedded in something that doesn't, you don't have the premium. So I apologize.
Section E6 discusses the selection of instruments. And in section E6A, we see that counselors must carefully consider the psychometric limitations, reliability, validity, and appropriateness of instruments that they select. And whenever possible, use multiple forms of assessment data or instruments in forming conclusion diagnoses or
Build a website you love with Wix. For your words, create your brand, your opportunity, your breakthrough.
recommendations. Of course, sometimes there are financial and logistical limitations that come into play. But if a counselor has an opportunity, within limits, of course, more data is usually better. So if you have a client and you're assessing them and you have access to additional instruments that can give you more helpful information, you actually have an ethical obligation to use multiple forms. In addition to it being an ethical obligation, it's also a good idea because it gives you more data to work with, so you can make a more accurate diagnosis or draw more accurate conclusions from the assessment data when you have more data available. And then we see section E6B, which discusses referral information. Now, what this section indicates is if you have a client and you refer them to a third party for assessment, so this would be a situation where, as the counselor, you're not providing the assessment yourself, but you're using a service, another counselor, somebody else, some third party to provide the assessment. You're obligated to provide sufficient data about your client as to ensure that the third party is able to select the appropriate assessment.
Things happen here, but no one really talks about it.
What exactly are we looking for? Something that...
Now taking a look at section E7, conditions of assessment administration. E7A discusses administration conditions. Counselors are obligated to administer assessments under the same conditions that were established when the assessment was being standardized. So in this instance, it's important, as in many instances in this section E of the Code of Ethics, it's important to read the treatment manual and look at the process, look at the conditions that were used when standardization of the instrument occurred. And typically there's not a lot of different conditions that you'll find. It's not unusual for an instrument to be administered in a place that's free of distractions, relatively quiet, and at least somewhat comfortable, meaning an air-conditioned room or a heated room depending on the temperature outside. If a counselor does administer an instrument in conditions that are not considered standard, then those irregularities, that irregularity in administration, needs to be noted in the interpretation. And in some cases, the results may be determined to be invalid because the testing conditions were not the ones that were not the same ones used when the instrument was standardized. E7B talks about provision of favorable conditions. And this is similar to E7A. This talks about the appropriate environment for the administration. So you have to make sure you use an appropriate environment when you administer an instrument. For example, comfort and lack of distractions and privacy. E7C discusses technological administration. Now, counselors are responsible to ensure that technologically administered assessments are functioning properly.
Own a vacation rental? If it's not listed on Booking.com, it's invisible to millions of travelers on our platform. Don't let your vacation rental be invisible. Get seen, get booked. On Booking.com, Booking.yeah.
Start your nursing journey with confidence at WGU. Our pre-licensure BSN program combines
and provide accurate results for clients. So again, it's important to have a good understanding of the technology you're using. If there's an error in that technology, it's an error that you should be aware of, then it's your responsibility. Just because using someone else's technology does not alleviate you of the responsibility of making sure that it's producing the correct results. And the last section on supervised assessment deals with self-administered assessments or instruments versus those where the counselor is actually performing the assessment. So unless an instrument is specifically designed to be self-administered, counselors cannot permit unsupervised use of an instrument. Now, of course, there are many instruments that are designed to be given to clients in an unsupervised format. Like self-reports are actually fairly common. But never presume that an instrument is self-report or doesn't require supervision. And remember that some self-report instruments could still require supervision as part of their design. Moving on to Section E8, Multicultural Issues, Diversity and Assessment. This section tells us that counselors who select assessment techniques that are normed on populations other than that of their client need to exercise caution. It's important that counselors recognize the effects of cultural traits on the administration and interpretation of assessments. Furthermore, the counselor is required to place the test results in the proper perspective with other relevant factors. Section E9 deals with scoring and interpretation of assessments. Counselors are required to, when they're reporting assessment results, they're required to consider a client's personal and cultural background, the level of a client's understanding of the results, and the impact of the results on the client. When the client goes to report assessment results, they must indicate any reservations they might have regarding the validity or reliability due to circumstances of the assessment or inappropriateness of the norms for the individual who was assessed. The second section in E9, which is E9B, talks about instruments with insufficient empirical data. Counselors are required to use caution when interpreting the results of instruments that do not possess sufficient empirical data to support the results of a respondent. And in cases where there is sufficient empirical data, counselors must qualify any conclusions, recommendations, or diagnoses that are based on these instruments. Now, Section E9C, Assessment Services, deals with counselors who provide assessment, scoring, interpretation services to agencies or other counselors. Counselors who provide such services are required to confirm the validity of their interpretations and accurately describe the purpose, norms, validity, reliability, and application of the procedures.
Build a website you love with Wix. For your words
and any special qualifications applicable to their use. Counselors are responsible to maintain their ethical responsibility to those being assessed at all times. So in these situations, and this is not unusual, where a counselor will specialize in assessment, what this section is telling us is that just because you're hired to assist a counselor who is primarily responsible for providing care to a client, you're still responsible because you're involved in a client's assessment. So your ethical responsibility is not reduced just because you're hired as a third party to assist an agency or another counselor by performing assessments. Section E10 discusses assessment security. Counselors are required to maintain the security and integrity of tests consistent with legal and contractual obligations, and are not permitted to reproduce, appropriate, or modify published assessments or parts of those assessments without permission from the publisher. So what this section is talking about is that instruments are produced by third parties, they're copyrighted, and we have to make sure, obviously, that we don't copy them or reproduce them or distribute them, but also that we keep them safe. If they are left in a non-secure environment, they can be easily photocopied, or an image can be taken of them, and they can be distributed. Now, of course, as with all copyrighted materials, fair use still applies. For example, for educational purposes or something of that nature, a part of an instrument can be used in line, of course, with fair use. And I'd recommend taking a look at the standards for fair use before doing that. But certainly what would not qualify is replicating an instrument and using it for its intended purpose. That's not fair use. And unfortunately, that occurs, and it's costly to our field. So researchers work hard to develop quality instruments, and then on occasion, agencies or certain counselors' agencies will perhaps buy a few of the instruments or somehow obtain a copy and use the copy without paying for the instrument. And that is strictly prohibited.
So basically, also what that is saying too is when it's protected, they just don't want everybody being able to use it if you're not certified in it and stuff like that too. So you'll go out to, say you want to do, I don't know if I can name one off the top of my head, but you may want to, maybe you've done your research and you have somebody who has depression that you feel. And you go, well, I want to give them this particular assessment. Well, you're not trained in it, you're not certified in it, all that, and they would get better results if it was done by somebody who is trained and certified. So they don't just put them out on the internet knowingly so that somebody can, download them and give them to others without being properly trained in it, right? So that's the protection. So all of this is saying we are there to protect the client in every way. And in ethics. So what they're saying, even if you're not doing assessments, they're saying you should know what you're talking about when you are doing your counseling. So same with assessments. So there is the business side of it too, of not having something that's reproducible if they are putting something out there to make money. And it's not them making money so they can get rich or anything, it's so that they can keep producing assessments and stuff like that. Let's see. I know there's a commercial coming up. We'll go one more and see what we get.
Section E11 deals with obsolete assessment and outdated results. Counselors are not permitted to use data or results from assessments that are obsolete or outdated for the current purpose. Furthermore, counselors must make every effort to prevent the misuse of obsolete assessment data by others. So a caution I would add regarding this section is that we can't set a definitive or specific time limit on this, meaning assessment data that's 5 years old may be obsolete or it may not be. The same can be said for assessment data that's a year old. It's important whenever you're receiving assessment data that you make sure that it is still valid for the current purpose. Section E12 discusses assessment construction and establish scientific procedures.
Build a website you love with Wix. For your words,
need to be used when designing assessments. So in looking at this section, it's important to recognize that the skills needed to develop assessments are distinct from those that needed to administer assessments. And certainly before attempting to construct an assessment, there's a good deal of education and training and experience that is necessary. So the last section is section E13. I have a couple slides on it. It's a large section, forensic evaluation, evaluation for legal proceedings. Depending on the environment where you work, this can be something that you might never see, or something you might work with every day, or something that's part of your job, but not all of your job. The first section, E13A, discusses your primary obligations when you're providing forensic evaluations.
Things happen here, but no one really talks about it.
So the primary obligation, or one of them, is to produce objective findings that can be substantiated based on information and techniques appropriate to the evaluation, which could include an examination of the client and or a review of client records. Other primary obligations include forming professional opinions based on professional knowledge and expertise that can be supported by the data gathered in the assessments, and defining the limits of reports or testimony, especially when an examination of the client has not been conducted. Taking a look at section E13B, consent for evaluation. This is still dealing with forensic evaluation. Individuals who are being evaluated must be informed by the counselor in writing that the relationship is for the purpose of an evaluation and is not therapeutic in nature. Furthermore, they must be informed of the individuals who will receive the evaluation report. Counselors performing forensic evaluations must obtain written consent from the individual being evaluated or from his or her legal representative, unless a court orders the evaluations to be conducted without written consent. In cases where forensic evaluations are being performed on children or adults who lack the capacity to give voluntary consent, informed written consent must be obtained from a parent or guardian. So moving forward through section E13, we have the last two subsections here. First one is E13C, client evaluation prohibited. When a counselor is performing forensic evaluations, they do not evaluate current or former clients clients' romantic partners, or clients' family members. Also, counselors do not provide counseling services to individuals who they are evaluating. And Section E13D tells us that counselors who perform forensic evaluations are required to avoid potentially harmful professional or personal relationships with romantic partners, family members, close friends of individuals that they are evaluating or individuals that they have evaluated in the past. I want to thank you for watching my
Okay. Sorry about all those commercials. I've learned from this guy is man, he puts a lot of good stuff out there, and just recently he's done a lot of, I guess, monetization of his website and stuff, so he does a lot of commercials, so sorry about that. Okay, so standards and guidelines for the evaluating test. So we just went through the importance of understanding the ethics and everything that go into and setting guidelines up. And, so if you learn anything on these, it's like the education around knowing your instruments that you're using and why and how to use them and so on. So kind of what he was using or talking about. So who does these? Like the Joint Committee on Testing Practices. They document the responsible test usage on how to do it, rights and responsibilities of the test takers, and the Code of Fair Testing Practices in Education that he talked about. So standards for qualifications of test users and so on. So the ACA has the Code of Ethics that he was going through. They are the ones that kind of put those guidelines up for you as counselors, okay? Okay, marriage and couple family counseling assessment competencies. So these are all just things that are telling you that in each section, marriage and family, individuals, substance use, all of those, they've all got their things where they would do guidelines, pre-employment testing in the ADA, stuff like that. So just know that everybody is watching and putting guidelines out there to make sure that we are doing our job in the best way possible to protect the client. So the client is at the heart of everything that we do. An overview of the assessment process. So assessment of client stage of change. So in the stages of change, which we will go through after we take a break, but assessment of the client's stages of change are pre-contemplation, contemplation, then there's preparation, action, and maintenance, and those we'll go through. But there's also a few more on there if you're doing this under the addictions guys, right? So there's lapse, relapse, and things like that are part of their recovery. So 4 major assessment phases. So we talked about test selection, administration, interpretation, and how do we communicate the findings are the important part of kind of what we went through, and then the ethics of all of those. Okay. And the last one here, key ethical and legal considerations and assessments, right? So under those competent, the counselor must be competent in their testing. All states recognize counselors as having testing and assessment within the scope of their practice, but various licensure boards may try and restrict those rights to make sure that we are all capable of administering those, right? They're looking for client welfare issues, client privacy and confidentiality is important. Quality of the test, remember reliability and validity and so on, and use of the assessments data in research. So when I did my dissertation, I was not only trying to find out information, but I was putting it in a research paper that is disseminated out. So I had even extra protection that I had to do as to not go against anybody's confidentiality or anything like that too. So there's all these added things that you have in place to make sure that we're always doing the right thing. So Okay, it's 11 and 45-ish. Let's see. 11:45. Can we come back 12:45? Is that good? Good lunchtime? Okay, well, let me see here. Hang on, let me stop this real quick.